Hi guys, Freddy here, and I'd just like to take this opportunity to talk about the Far Cry series of games. Most specifically about the storytelling in Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 5. You see, like many people, at Christmas during the Steam sale, I decided to treat myself, and one of the games I purchased was Far Cry 5 and Farcry New Dawn. And before I go much further, I have to say that they're a whole load of fun, and I've played them both all the way through and really rate the experience. But I've been a fan of the Far Cry series since it began back in 2004. The first game was released by Crytek Studios, who are also responsible for the fantastic Crysis 1 and Crysis 2, and the lackluster Crysis 3. Far Cry is different to the rest of the series, as it deals with the sci-fi concept of a mad scientist creating genetically engineered monsters, which you, as a lone protagonist, must fight and defeat. Far Cry, like the later Crysis and Far Cry 3, is set on a tropical island, which forms the boundaries of the game. But what set Far Cry apart from other games of the time was the freedom the game offered you, letting you free on a massive open-world environment to achieve the objectives in your own way. The game felt completely different from the constricted maps of other games of the time, allowing you to sneak around the jungle and approach targets in various ways, finding the best cover or the quietest approach with the fewest guards. Now, Far Cry was a long way from perfect. The enemy AI, for example, was seemingly far too omniscient and capable of spotting you from far too great a distance, although that possibly was due to the bright Hawaiian shirt that your character wears throughout. After Far Cry, there were a number of more limited conversions of the game to consoles and the like, with Far Cry Instincts, Evolution, Predator and Vengeance, all providing the same storyline, but in a far more limited game, until the first real sequel was released, Far Cry 2. Far Cry 2 was released in 2008 and was done by a completely different team to the original. And although it takes the basic open world concept of the first, transplanting it to a small Central African state, it has a very different feel to it, introducing concepts such as weapon degradation and a dynamic weather system, and my personal favourite feature, that objects can catch fire which can spread over a large area, creating a dynamic barrier in combat and a way of flushing enemies out of cover. The game also introduced a malaria infection to the main character, which must be handled with medicine, or it causes negative effects on gameplay. Now, while I found some features quite fun, I wasn't a big fan of Far Cry 2. The malaria infection was annoying, and the step towards realism sapped a lot of the fun I'd found in the first game. Although the gap between Far Cry 2 and Far Cry 3 is the same 4 years as that between the first game and the second, by the time Far Cry 3 was released in 2012, it felt like the series was being revived rather than just receiving a sequel. But what a sequel it was! Following the story of an American tourist rescuing his friends on a tropical island, Far Cry 3 took the same kind of setting as the first game and introduced an absolutely brilliant set of characters and storyline. Starting as a fairly unskilled character and developing your tactics and skills as you climb towers to open new sectors of the island and liberate settlements as you take back the island, the game truly feels like all the options are open to you. The main plot runs almost parallel to your task of clearing the island, and while the main plot becomes easier to achieve when you've got more access to the areas, it's possible to ignore the main plot at times until you've liberated and explored almost the entire island. Far Cry 3 received fantastic reviews at the time, and set the template which all of the later games have followed fairly closely, with the liberation of settlements being a core element repeated over and over again. And it's this element which makes a lot of the fun of the games, learning the terrain, finding ways of taking these settlements from the enemy that control them. Whether you sneak into the camp and take out their ability to call for reinforcements, sneak around taking the enemy out one by one, or finding a point to watch over the settlement and sniping out the enemy silently from afar. Or perhaps you'll release one of the wild animals they've captured and let it attack them and cause a distraction. Or maybe you want to just charge straight in, taking cover in the buildings and mowing down the enemy with superior firepower. It's this gameplay and the way your plans can totally change which is so enjoyable. Because sometimes you'll spend ages spotting every guard and preparing the perfect sniping point, when you'll get spotted and have to go on full offensive as the enemy shout out your location and open fire. While other times suddenly a tiger will charge into the camp and take out most of the guards without you needing to do anything. Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon was released only a year later in 2013, and set somewhat of the standard of the Far Cry series from now on, where the same engine is just reskinned and released as a new game, whereas in reality it's not much more than a DLC. Blood Dragon takes Far Cry 3 and changes it into a campy 80s action movie setting, with much of the game voiced by Michael Biehn of Terminator and Aliens fame. It's a load of fun to play through, but the game is extremely shallow and isn't particularly memorable or fun to replay. But when you played Far Cry 3 and were wanting more, it was absolutely perfect at the time. Far Cry 4, released in 2014, again was very much just a reskinned version of Far Cry 3, transplanting the setting into that of a Himalayan country undergoing a civil war, and with your protagonist just wanting to scatter the ashes of your deceased mother, rather than any real sense of revenge. The game introduced some interesting new features though, like rideable animals in the form of elephants, which you can use to attack enemies, and aircraft to quickly travel over the map. One of the successes of the game is definitely the antagonist, Pagan Min, who personally I never really had any problem with, and if he'd not tried to kill me, I'd have been happy leaving him alone. Again, if you loved Far Cry 3, then Far Cry 4 was pretty much just more of the same, and provided much of the same fun as its predecessor. But many felt it was just too samey, without much innovation, and I personally felt the plot was a lot weaker than 3. Now, Far Cry Primal I can't really speak at length about, as I've never really played it. Coming out in 2016, the game introduced trainable animals to the game, to use as allies, and transplanted the entire setting back into prehistoric times, with the player taking the part of a Stone Age man fighting mammoths and saber-toothed tigers to take villages away from rival tribes. So, we'll move on to Far Cry 5. Released in 2018, taking the basic concept one again of liberating settlements, it moves the game into the heartlands of the United States, where you take the part of a US Marshal sent to arrest the leader of a religious cult, very much in the style of David Koresh and the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas. The cult resists the arrest, and you find yourself alone inside a large area the cult has taken control of, helping the locals resist the cult and trying to defeat its leaders. The game takes all of the features of the previous games and improves upon them. For example, the trainable animals from the previous games are now bolstered by recruitable NPCs who can fight alongside you. The microlights and autogyros of the previous games are added to with helicopter gunships and armed planes. And once again, a brilliant antagonist in the form of Joseph Seed, who got under my skin and made me really want to hurt him. But, before we come back to the plot, let's finish our journey through the series, with what is currently the latest game, Far Cry New Dawn. New Dawn uses the same setting as Far Cry 5, but is set after a nuclear war, with the survivors trying to reclaim the valley from some raiders, this time trying to gain the help of the remains of the cult from Far Cry 5. It's the first true sequel in the series, with many of the same characters making reappearances, and filling in what happened after the events of Far Cry 5. While it could be seen as a bit of a cash grab, with the engine and even the map being somewhat recycled from the previous game, it's different enough both in tone and in storyline that it feels completely separate, and in my mind is a worthy addition to the series. Now, after all of that, the thing I really wanted to talk about was the storyline of Far Cry 3 and that of Far Cry 5, and why, while I feel that Far Cry 5 was a lot of fun as a game, it was a failure plot-wise. You see, Far Cry 3 has you taking the part of Jason Brody, a young rich kid from the USA, who is on a tour with his friends of the islands of the Pacific when they are captured by the pirates of the Rook Islands, led by Vas Montenegro, portrayed magnificently by Michael Mando. The pirates plan to ransom the teenagers back to their families, but also betray that ransom and sell the kids onto slavery. Jason and his ex-military brother try to escape, but the brother is put to death by Vas, and Jason allowed to escape so the pirates can hunt him down. But Jason is rescued by the native Rakyat people of the islands, who believe he is destined to help them get rid of the pirates. This destiny is shown by a mystical tattoo on Jason's arm, which mysteriously grows as Jason obtains various almost supernatural abilities. However, in one cutscene, Jason awakens from a drug-fueled sleep to discover one of the Rakyat tattooing his arm while he was unconscious. And many of the visions you see are obvious drug trips caused by the consumption of various rare herbs and plants on the island. As you rescue your friends, it also becomes apparent how the violence you are performing is changing Jason, as he becomes hardened to all the killing he is doing, with one of the final plot points asking the question whether Jason can ever return to his normal life once again. As a seasoned killer, will he ever fit back into normal society, or has he changed too much and should remain on the islands among the pirates and tribesmen who kill on a daily basis? Whereas in Far Cry 5, you take the part of a rookie deputy, who is to arrest the cultist leader Joseph Seed, As the cultists resist and you're left alone in the valley against the cultists, you have to rescue the other members of the team sent to arrest Seed, and take out his family who lead the cult. Like Far Cry 3, there's various segments where you're under the influence of drugs, but this time there's no real mystical element on your side. Although the game suggests that Seed may very well have divine inspiration. Also unlike 3, in 5, you're an officer of the law, fighting people who have kidnapped, drugged and murdered American law enforcement officers and citizens within their own country. Your actions aren't just morally justifiable, but also completely within the law. You aren't just a kid taking the law into your own hands, you're a trained professional, even if an inexperienced one. And that starts to be the point of major differences between the two games. Whereas Far Cry 3 asks whether the actions of violence and outright murder you commit in a video game are acceptable, because by the end of the game, Jason is a monster by all honest definition of the term. He is someone who is in all likelihood cut people's throats, set them on fire and watched them burn to death, and shot so many people in the face, as well as not paying due care and attention when operating a motor vehicle. The deputy, however, is in a terrible situation, but he is just doing his duty. But also, where Far Cry 3 accepts you've done terrible things and as characters in the game recognise this, with antagonists recognising you're now a dangerous opponent, the Racket recognising you're now a worthy and possibly legendary ally, and your friends recognising that you're emotionally scarred from what you've done and nearly unrecognisable to who you previously were. In Far Cry 5, you get told begrudgingly by allies that you're no longer a rookie, and enemies repeatedly tell you how weak and insignificant you are. And this was a point that really bothered me about the narrative dissonance in the game, that I could just have broken into an enemy compound and brutally killed a dozen or so cultists, silently, when I get a radio message from one of the Seed family telling me how weak and useless I am. The game also has sections where you just collapse unconscious so you can be taken captive for the next cutscene to take place, usually when you've managed to liberate enough territory or cause enough chaos to reach a milestone. And the fact that 1 minute I can be taking bullets, diving for cover and defeating numerous opponents, and the next I'm collapsing and waking up tied to a chair so I can be told how rubbish I am, just feels completely different in tone. When I'm playing the character, he's a deadly warrior capable of taking out nearly any opponent, but in the cutscenes I'm a blundering idiot who can barely walk in a straight line without being captured. But what really hammered home this point to me was when the second last boss of the game, Jacob, was telling me how he was going to break me. I checked my in-game stats, and it showed that I'd killed over 1,800 cultists, including shooting over 400 of them in the head. Why does the game think I'm so weak, when it also shows me that I've got a truly ridiculous number of kills? Although, I must comment, while researching this to discover whether this outmatched any soldier ever, I did discover about Sergeant Dillard Johnson, who has 2,746 recorded kills, so perhaps my deputy is just a rookie after all. Now, don't get me wrong, Far Cry 5 isn't trying to ask the same questions as 3. It's trying to ask whether perhaps, as the protagonist of the game, you might be on the wrong side. As Joseph Seed is predicting the end of the world, and he may very well be right, given the sequel game is based around a post-apocalyptic version of the same county. But Seed I find unconvincing, as he preaches that only the strong will survive, and the weak should perish, and that's totally against my personal beliefs. But that's beyond the realms of this video, so I'll end it here, and thank you for watching this video, it's very much appreciated. Please like and subscribe if you like what I'm making, but most of all, you look after yourselves, and you look after those around you, because if Far Cry 5 has taught me nothing, it's that the strong should protect those who need it. But anyway, I'll catch you later. Bye now.